Welcome, Nadia. Great to have you on the
Thank
show.
you. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you. I actually found you via a webinar you did with the ladies at Forget the Funnel, where you talked about managing a team and your leadership principles. And I'd actually like to start things off with a quote that I found there and that I thought was quite a nugget, and so we can kind of shift into the conversation that way. So, quote from Nadia: when you become a manager, it's actually a completely new job altogether. Being the best marketer is no longer your primary function. Your new job is actually figuring out how to make sure the other people on your team can become just as good, if not better, than you were at your previous job. So I have kind of saw this firsthand, and I know the situation all too well. You know, you're doing everything yourself, and all of a sudden you're called up to build and lead a team. And can you walk us through how you got started in Venngage and how you managed the transitions from, getting your first marketing job to then head of marketing and now where you are now as the chief growth officer, and kind of how you felt along the way?
Yeah, man, I said that quote. Wow, that sounds a lot more profound than anything I say on a day-to-day basis. Um, yeah, so I joined Venngage right out of school. And I don't know, I was like going through this like panic mode after I did my undergrad. I panicked. I was like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna get a job? So then I did a master's, and then the same thing happened again, like towards, midway through my master's. I was like, I should start applying now so that I don't go through this panic mode again. And I applied for like a bunch of jobs, and I think Venngage was like, I was just looking through jobs at Startup North or something, which is a career site in Toronto.
Hmm.
And they were looking for a digital marketer, and I was like, my background's in theater and my master's was in digital media, so I was looking for something more in like the creative field. And like a lot of my program is a little bit of a mesh between like entrepreneurship, UX, UI design, a little bit of software, basically all the stuff you need to kind of run a business, right? So I was like, oh, I could do digital marketing, right? Like that seems in line with kind of some of my interests. And based on my thesis, I was looking at, how do you engage audiences for live performance, right? So I was trying to do this thing with intersecting theater and technology. And what I realized is I was just reading like a bunch of marketing books on like audience engagement and that kind of thing. So then also, if you hear little pitter patters in the background, that's just my dog, just making sure
Hello.
everything's okay. um, so yeah, I figured I was like, just reading all these marketing books and decided to just apply. And I didn't actually hear back for several months. And then Eugene, the CEO, was just like, "Hey, are you still looking for a job?" And I was like, and so then came in for an interview, and I think, just essentially hired me on the spot, despite not having any experience. I think in my cover letter, I just said I didn't really know what I was doing, but I could work hard and figure things out. And that was good enough. So I got the job. And then sure enough, in the first few months, the feedback I got wasn't great because I wasn't really doing anything, clearly, because I didn't actually know how to do any marketing. So I just started like Googling like crazy to try to understand who the people in the space were that were doing it, right? And who were doing it well
Hmm.
and who people were listening to, and pretty much trying to reverse engineer and replicate them. Just like you would do in theater school, right? You like see an actor and you're
Mm.
like, what are the things that they're doing? How do they practice their craft? How do I replicate that in performance, right? Literally, our jobs are to copy people. And so I started just like looking through all these different influencers and trying to understand what they were saying, and trying to learn from them directly. So I just started reaching out to people and say, hey, like this really specific thing, can you do you want to chat about it, and start walking them through. They didn't need to help me at all, right? I was just like some random person. But a lot of people were pretty helpful, and from there started to like actually make things work. And we started to scale, and we started to gain a lot more traction. And then as we continued to make more hires, because initially we were a really small team, we also needed to hire more developers, of course, more designers. And so I started managing about 2 other people on the team, on the marketing team. And then a couple years later, the team kept growing, and it didn't make sense for me to manage 15 people directly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So then decided to like shift into another role, and then and things just kind of happened naturally. And I think one of the main things I did was, if I thought there was something that was the right thing to test, usually I would just do it. And then I did that long enough, and then I would get yelled at for not following the proper protocol. So then I would test it on my own outside of Venngage. So if I made a mistake, it wouldn't be harmful to the company. And
Yep.
I started, that comes from experience. So I started doing that more frequently and running like these weird little tests on the side just to see what I could do. But it constantly just like, it was like an iteration of things that worked. If I, we started with link building and content marketing. So I was just like, okay, well, the goal initially was get more links, very simple and straightforward, right? So then I was like, okay, well, how do I get more links without having to reach out and, bother people so much? How do I make them want them? So I'm like, well, I need to have better content that's like more engaging. Okay, like what does that look like? And we kept kind of following that iterative process. And it always stuck to that. And then the next part was, well, some people are in like all these expert roundups, and they're speaking at events, and they probably get tons of links because people will just come to them. So how do I get people to just come to me and ask me to be included? So then I was just like, maybe I'll just start speaking at events. So then I was just like, how do I do that? And it basically was like this little step-by-step process of, figuring what's the next thing that I need to do to get to that next little level, rather than trying to look at it like, how do I drive tons of revenue to this company, right? That's way too big of a loaded question. And it's there's so many little pieces there that it's just following the line of what works and then continuing to improve and iterate on that one little line. Now we're at a slightly different position, of course, where that's no longer my primary focus and goal. But at that time, that's what worked really well. And then it just made sense for us. Most of our leadership and executive team has all kind of followed a very similar path. Same with our head of product, same with our engineering management. Everyone just was pretty good at their job, but also good at communicating and telling other people what to do, and just like kind of took it into their own hands to do that thing. And so it just felt natural, right? People were already starting to come to me to ask questions about marketing. They were already going to Joanna to ask her questions about product. So it just seemed very natural. So that's kind of how it worked out. You take the steps and show that you're a natural leader, and it eventually gets recognized not only by exec, but by the rest of the people at the company.
One thing that stuck out to me, I think I saw a blog post of yours about, I think you called it kind of the bottleneck problem, when you did the transition from being the doer and doing everything yourself to actually having to delegate tasks, especially the transition phase when you still think you need to do everything yourself while you have a team and then you do both. Can you talk about that bottleneck problem, how you called it?
Yeah, this is actually a term that like Eugene used to use in his feedback to me, which was, you now have a bottleneck problem. And I was like, what the hell is that? And then, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like the more stuff you have to do, like, so the reason I said you have, the marketer job and the management job are different is because the requirements for both are totally separate from each other. So if I had to do all of my marketing work and I had to do all of the management work, it would just be too many things to handle. And ultimately, I can't put all of that stuff in a tiny, like, the neck of a bottle, because it's just going to take too long to get through. And so what was happening was people were typically waiting for me to do something or tell them what to do. And that was where the issue lied. It wasn't about, so basically you stop everything because you're like trying to do everything at the top. And so and so that was where that stemmed from, and really that was, I think, comes down to an issue of trust, right? And not properly communicating and delegating anything to your team. And so that was like one of the things that I just had to figure out how to do, is how do I be okay with other people making mistakes, in for the hope that the outcome will be that they'll learn from it and actually do the job better, and not worry so much about me having to do everything. Because at that point I was worried that, we're on such a good trajectory here with like getting links and the content process, and I had it kind of all in my head. So I was worried that if I stopped to train people, then the flow would stop and we wouldn't grow at the same rate. And so what I did, I think one day I just like sat down. I'm like, I'm just going to write down my thought process, like step by step, and exactly do that. And then at least I could keep doing the work, and I can just give them this thing, which essentially ended up being like the start of our playbook. And then from that, like, at least there was enough context to be like, okay, this is how you're thinking about it. So maybe it's not a matter of just following the steps. It's like understanding why you think those are the right steps. And then starting to add on. And then from there, like now I don't do like any of the marketing, right? I fully like pushed all of that aside. And now that's ultimately what's going to give management the opportunity to look at other problems that you may not have been aware of before, but then you can at least start focusing on that, start trying to figure out how to work that out, and then do the same thing where you delegate the next process.
And as I understood from what you said previously, the trick in the book is to give the ownership and accountability to the people, right? Because I mean, if you are not really trusting them and also be okay with mistakes, as you said, you're never at ease. I mean, if you constantly think like, I could actually do this better, it's also tough for them to learn.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about like how you would do that? Like how do you hold someone accountable and give ownership?
Yeah, and I mean that's a constant trick, right? There's not ever going to be a point where you feel like, okay, I've solved it, and like because everyone, and I think it's the same with our company too, right? Like my top down leadership will always have opinions on how to do things, and we might see like things differently, which I think is very normal. And I think it's just a matter of like testing it. So one of the main things that we do is like, as long as you can always like back everything up with data and proof, that's all I care about, right? Like I don't necessarily want just an opinion of why this might be a good idea. I want it to be a good idea, and I want you to prove that it's a good idea, and I don't want to have to be the only one coming up with good ideas. So let's say, we're like running some email campaigns or some email tests, and I'm trying to convert X user to go down some different funnel. I might start with an idea and run like a very like lo-fi version of that test and show the data and be like, okay, here's like a test I ran, like what do we do next? And then that can maybe fuel more ideas, and other people might want to jump on into that project. But if this is a personal opinion, but I feel like if you can show some inclination of the possibility of a win, then people get more motivated and inspired to actually follow through and try to find new answers from it. But if everything is always like the same process, and they always have to like do the same thing without any possibility of creativity or inspiration, like why would anyone want to do that job, right? It's just boring, and like no one wants to be bored at work. So it's like this weird balance between trying to show the data to say, look, this is the right idea, but also there's room for creativity, and there's room for it to expand into something new, where I'm not going to hold your hand and like micromanage you to figure it out, right?
And in terms of how you approached, trying out new channels or new strategies, from what I've heard you saying, or also what I've seen out in the field a lot, is in the beginning, you try a lot of hacks and tactics and things. And as you have more time to actually strategize, how you described it as well, how did that shift? I mean, how do you now still go for these best practices and hacks, or do you have like a overarching strategy where that you execute against, and how much experimentation is still in there?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, I would say, so if we zoom back a bit, like the hacks and the tactics, I think early on when you don't have traction, that's super necessary, right? You have to just test a bunch of things because you don't know what's going to work. But when you find the thing that works slightly better or like way better than everything else, then that's what we double down on. For us, it was, our like tests with link building, and we ran, and like even within that sphere of SEO, like you can't just try SEO once and be like, I figured it out. Like it's not going to work like that. You need to test within that bubble, and then you break that down, and then now it's like, okay, well, the content side and then the link side, what are all the tests that we can run within here? And when you break it down, like the tests never end. It's just the nature and the scope of what that test looks like. And so we continue to do that, right? Like that mentality has not changed. There's always going to be experiments. It's just how focused are those experiments, and what is the goal associated with that experiment. For us now, like we're no longer so focused on just tons of acquisition, right? Now we're focused on very targeted acquisition, and it's almost like switching from a B2C to B2B strategy altogether, which is very, very different. And that's like now one of the new challenges I'm trying to figure out is like, how do I totally shift this mindset and this mentality of like, where before it was like, get all the links, to now it's like, no, only get like these specific ones and make sure they're like at this time and it's only for this content. Like it becomes really, really structured. And so, yeah, and I think the idea that, you stop the experimentation, you stop the test, that shouldn't be the case. There should always be a level of that. And then you also, of course, have the process and the strategy that maintains that growth system. But there's always going to be like little, leaky buckets here, like something's going to be wrong on the other side. So that's where you run like little variations to figure out what works. And the reality is, the world changes and expectations change, people's mentalities change, their needs change. So you can't expect that the same thing's always going to work all the time. You have to be ready to jump into some type of experiment.
You mentioned the challenge that you're currently facing. Are there some challenges in the past that you could highlight where you have, maybe fucked up and, learned a ton from?
Oh, if we had many more hours, I'm sure I could go through all of the things I fucked up. Yeah, I'm pretty good at making mistakes, is what I've realized. But I think as long as you don't repeat them too many times, then that's the thing. Yeah, I have a tendency to like jump in with a gut feeling, and it's not always right. And I also have a feeling to hold that gut feeling very closely and argue it to my death if I need to.
Becomes like your darling.
Yeah. And I think ultimately that comes from like an ego place, right? Which is something I should probably work on. But yeah, like I've made like tons of mistakes, and I can't really pinpoint one thing that maybe has worked. I'm trying to think of an example. You like really like early on in the beginning, something as simple as like, whoops, I accidentally sent the wrong email to like 100,000 people, and my bad. To like letting some experiments live and like just not follow the process and set the wrong expectation for other people at the team, and forgetting the fact that people will probably try to follow my example, so I should set a good one. Things like that, where you kind of just forget what, like you kind of, I think it comes from an ego place, where it's often those mistakes that are detrimental come from a place where you forget that other people are involved. And then you're kind of like so into your own idea and so into what you think is the right choice, that other people are watching, and other people have their own observations, their own ideas, and if you forget to hear them and trust them, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you're keeping your team and your company aligned on and keeping them motivated. Otherwise, why would they want to continue to help you with your ideas? But that's like a little bit of a wider scope of like a
Yeah.
specific thing.
But I think you touched an important topic with setting expectations and making sure that people are motivated and know what they're working on. Like, how do you communicate one-on-one or weekly all hands, or like what kind of communication um, methods do you use, and how do you structure those?
Yeah, so I think that every person is different and everyone is going to have their own unique style of communication that they need, right? And so I don't have like one specific structure for every single person. I
Hmm.
think good management comes down to relationship building and really understanding the individuals on your team. And if you can understand, like, person A might need a little bit more coddling and hand holding, and maybe that's what they need to do a good job or feel inspired to do a good job because, the fundamental issue there may be a lack of confidence. Whereas you might
Hmm.
have person B who's got way too much confidence and they need to be taken down a few notches. And then you have to be
Hmm.
a little bit more direct and maybe a little bit um, like more aggressive. Uh, and I think it comes down to understanding what works and then reflecting back with those people, because one-on-ones and any of those meetings is really just a constant check-in where you're kind of like a
Hmm.
therapist,
Right, you're
just making
listening,
sure that
right?
they feel, yeah. And it's like the purpose of a one-on-one really is to hear what people are saying and try to do your job as a manager to listen, even if you don't always agree with their opinions, right? Because that's the purpose. It's like a feedback loop. So granted, like our one-on-ones, like my one-on-ones don't always stick to that exact pattern all the time. It's not necessary all the time. Sometimes people just like don't have anything that they want to say.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think a lot of management is just relationship building, and the reality is like the the statement is people don't leave a company for the company, they leave for the management, right?
Hmm.
So if you have like a history of losing a lot of people on your team and generally people don't want to listen to your opinions, then maybe it's not about them. It's like something that you're communicating, or maybe you're just not managing them the way they need to be managed. So that's something I try to do frequently, is just check in and see like, is there anything I can be doing differently that might help you do your job better? Is there anything you need in terms of like connections or like guidance and coaching? And rather than just telling them what to do, I try to walk through my thought process on how to
Hmm.
solve the problem instead of just telling them the answer. So a lot of it is just like a question loop, right? Like, why is this a problem, and what have you tried to do to solve it, and where are you finding, you're hitting a roadblock, and what else do you think you can try to do? Just constantly questioning until you get somebody else to find the answer, and then hopefully, getting again inspiring them and motivating them to problem solve. And I think that's a lot of where ownership lies too, right? It's not it's not micromanaging and dictating. it's
Right.
it's it's yeah, coaching to solve the problem themselves.
So if you would have to, you know, tell, give any kind of lessons to or advice to yourself 5 years ago, I think you started 5.5 years ago or something like that at
Yeah,
at
almost
at
6 now.
Venngage, like what would those advice look like? Like you could sit together with your past self and like, hey Nadia, listen.
Hmm. I haven't thought much about that. I've always been the type to do what I want. um uh I would probably like keep listening more rather than like jumping into an idea. I think people forget how important it is to listen and kind of form your thoughts and collect the data before jumping into an idea. So yeah, probably like listen more, collect the data, do the research before making too many quick decisions, because even if something works well in the beginning, there could be repercussions later on that might not be the most beneficial thing. So just paying attention to more of those details, I think, would
Hmm.
have been helpful.
Hmm. And uh, what do you have any kind of meta skills that you think a growth marketer should have today, or it would be important to develop those, um,
Like more
like
like
right,
soft skills or
more like writing or like
okay.
this kind of
Um,
stuff.
yeah, I think the main thing that keeps coming back to me, like have being a creative person coming from a creative background,
Hmm.
is analytical ability. Like you have to be a critical thinker because I think that's the one thing that's differentiated for me, the top performers and the bottom performers, is you can be like the most creative person and have all these ideas, but if you can't back up your ideas with like good critical thinking abilities, it doesn't matter, right? Because you're never going to be able to prove that they're successful and you're never going to be able to follow up on the right thing. So you kind of need a balance of both, but definitely critical thinking, analytical ability is extremely important.
Are there things that you did specifically to hone those skills? Since you said, you are coming from a creative background, did you feel like you had those coming in anyways, or you
I I mean,
acquired
I
them?
think yeah, I think the soft skill that kind of leads to that analytical ability is curiosity, right? And
Mm.
like a rigid curiosity and like that you can never kind of satisfy because that's what will help you dig and dig and dig into that data until you find what satisfies that curiosity. I've always been like into like I went to theater school, but my elective was, you know, organic chem and logic courses, and those were the things
Okay.
I did
Uh-huh.
better in than my actual theater studies classes. So that was like the fun thing for me. So now I get to do a little bit of both, where I still get to do my creative stuff, but have fun with the data, which is like the nerdiest thing. But I love like digging into, if I can just get a day to just like look at Mixpanel or look through, you know, a bunch of different spreadsheets, that's fun for me. Someone's just like, go speak at an event. I'm like, okay, like I guess I'll be creative today.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
But yeah, like I think if you're curious and you actually, and I think it comes back to, you know, feeling motivated. Like if you like where you're working and you like what you're doing, you like who you're working for, aren't you going to want to do a good job? And then if you want to do a good job, you're going to keep digging and trying to figure out what are the things that you can do better, and ultimately keep driving down into that data. So I think it really all kind of comes together as a loop. It's with itself, management and marketing management is a growth loop, right? Like it's not a linear process. You have to like kind of do everything all the time and consistently do it. Otherwise, one little piece is going to break and then the whole thing will fall apart.
Have you ever felt, so I mean, one thing that comes up in conversations over and over is this, you also came into marketing, you know, from, was that theater school? So from
Does anyone not fall into marketing though? Is
yeah,
anyone,
I mean,
I'm
it's
going to grow
crazy.
up and be a marketer.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to
I,
use
I know
analytics.
very few people, exactly. So since this is also such a new field and you kind of get dropped into it, or you kind of happen to be dropped into it, I mean, did you ever feel like overwhelmed by it all? And the one thing that I hear coming up over and over also from conversation I have or from past employees and so forth is like this imposter thing. Because I mean, especially if you do like your personal brand, you kind of go out and now all of a sudden you have a team, and then you think you need to be as good as they are in their specific field and everything. So have you felt anything of that during your career at all?
All the time, every day.
Mm.
um
Mhm.
and I think it's like in itself a blessing and a curse, right? If you don't have the imposter syndrome, you just have this huge ego and never think you have to do
Mm.
anything to improve. If you do have imposter syndrome, yes, you're always overwhelmed and panicking, but at least you're constantly trying to iterate and you don't think of yourself as like this bigger, better person than everyone else. And I think it's really normal, um, especially like at Venngage, like a lot of the women on the team are like, most of our management team is women, right? And so there's this
Mhm.
like constant mentality of like, am I not good enough? Are people not going to respect me? Like, unfortunately. society has made this a male dominant world, so it's very common. But the thing is, like, you can't possibly as a manager know everything that's going on, and you
Right.
can't know all the skills. That's why you hire other people to do it for you, right? And you have, and like, I think that's one of the things I use as in management is if I'm looking at, you know, higher level metrics, my job is to understand that the patterns and the trends are shifting in the right direction, right? I need to know that the high level inputs are the ones that are being influenced. My job is not necessarily to know exactly how to get there, but to guide people to figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
So if somebody on my team, let's say, is like, we're doing paid advertising, like, I understand the logic behind it, right? I'm like, to me, it makes sense that if this number doesn't go up, this number probably won't go up. So that's how I'll break it down. And I'll be like, well, why is this number over here? And like, how come no one's clicking on this thing? And why are we spending this much money over here? I'm not going to do all this stuff. But from that, I can kind of make an assumption that common sense says this isn't working, right? Now, if somebody else is like an expert and they're like, actually, this is how Google works, and this is going to take some time for this to work. And here's an example of what I did last month, and here's where it's at now. This is what's going to happen here. I'm like, okay, great. That's what I'm looking for. I just want you to explain to me why the numbers are like this. I don't need you to like just listen and say, oh, it's not working, I'm going to turn it off. And to me, like, I need, one of the things I will coach some or tell somebody on my team is often, you are supposed to be the expert on this subject, not me.
Yeah.
I just want to know why it's working and why it's not working. That's
And
it.
yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a pervasive problem. And but as you said, I mean, it's also a sign of like not a how do you call this, like gargantuan ego that is like walking around thinking, you're the best in everything you do. I I also think oftentimes it helps if you have it yourself to actually see it in others and help them to kind of say like, hey, now you can do that. I see
Yeah.
you can do that.
Yeah, you need a good balance of like being firm but also being encouraging, right? Like, I don't think you should be coddling people on your team, and especially if it's like a consistent thing where like it's just
Mm,
not getting there. At some point, obviously, you need to be like, we've discussed this thing.
yeah.
Why isn't it going up? Um, but yeah, I mean, you have to like recognize the point. Like, you as a person, I like to think, how do I like to be managed, and what are the things that make me feel motivated? What are the things that just discourage me and like make me check out, right? And for me, it's like, if I feel like somebody doesn't trust me and I'm not being respected,
Yeah.
um, that's like a big deterrent. I'm like, well, I don't care then, right? Like, why should I care? So I try to like use that same mentality with how I coach other people, right? I want them to
Yeah.
feel respected and trusted and empowered to do a good job.
I think, but what you mentioned just now, I think is very important because it's oftentimes, there's these kind of nice managers, if you want, that um, want everyone to feel good, but then also the business results are super important. And you mentioned this a couple times now, like how do you draw the line? Do you have is this very situational and like how you feel, or do you have some sort of rules in your head where you say like, oh no, now it's enough, like let's address this head on?
Yeah, I think for in that sense, it is more of a feeling and like an instinct, right? If I don't know what's going on in someone's personal life, and I don't know if like if one day they're just off, or if like it's like a couple weeks and they're just like not following the usual trend, maybe I won't jump in angrily because there's probably something else going on because they have a history of proving it, right?
Hmm.
So at that point, I might be like, hey, like, what's going on? Is everything okay? However, if I've tried the nice thing a few times and it's never kind of worked, then I may have to shift gears and test different things out. And that's what I mean by like, it really comes down to the individual and like how they respond to feedback. Because some people are self-motivated, right? Like, you just need to say, hey, I expected this result to be better. Why isn't it better? That might be enough. And then some people just don't care, right? They check out, they're like,
Hmm.
oh, like, it will improve, and make some blasé excuse. And then that's not enough, where you might need to drill a little bit deeper into the data. But I think as long as like for the most part it comes from a place of objectivity, you can't really argue with it. Whereas like if I were to say something subjective, like, hey, you suck all the time, that's not at all productive, right? No one's going to improve on that. It's way too
No.
subjective and it's not useful to anybody, and it's just going to make them feel demoralized. So why would I use that method? So yeah, it's like I mean, I ultimately want people to pay attention to what matters, and it isn't personal, right? Like if you put too much emotion into the feedback, I think that's where it gets a little bit hard to listen to, especially if it's consistent. I don't think I give hard feedback too often, so when it does come, it's like, you know, you should probably, like, it's a little bit more respected,
Yeah.
rather than if you were to always be angry and always be
Shouting
yelling and losing
around
your crap, then
yeah.
eventually people are like, whatever, it's just another one of those days.
Right, exactly.
Right? When's that gonna end?
And I mean, how do you talk, or like what is your structure around talking to other teams at Venngage? Like, with which teams are you closely in contact, and what are you trying to learn from them, and how do you apply those insights into your marketing strategy?
Yeah, well, right now my main focus is revenue and what will influence revenue, and that is no longer just on acquisition and just controlled by marketing, right? There's like a lot of product funnels,
Mm.
and different loops in the product. There's different ways that the product is built, in which case I'll have to talk to engineering, and like there's a lot of different pieces. So personally, the whole company, actually, we do like a lot of culture building, and a lot of people hang out all together. There's obviously team silos, but within our company, it's not like nobody talks to engineering. If you're on marketing, everyone's friends, we all hang out all the time anyway. But yeah, like I mean, if there's an experiment I'm trying to run, I can't only run things via email or just through paid, right? Obviously, at some point, it needs to be a product experiment, or like a marketing and product and engineering touch points are all involved. So quite frequently, and like we use the shape up cycle that Basecamp uses. Not sure if you've
Mm.
read the book,
Hmm. I
but
mean, I didn't read the whole document, but
yeah,
yeah.
so we started using that as a process, and it seems to be working quite well for us, where we have representatives from every team basically betting or voting on different experiments or different projects to run. So everyone has a say in what happens um, in our product. So there is like a lot of, you know, joint collaboration throughout different teams, and everyone is kind of involved at some point in the same piece of that process. So it is new, and there's like a lot of like trying to work around like how it all works together. But usually if like a marketing person has an idea for an experiment, we have to work with a product person, right, who knows the
Hmm.
process very well and will help push it through and make sure that everything's tested properly and everything's measured the right way, and vice versa, right? Like a product person's not just going to toss something into like an email campaign or into the blog without, you know, talking to marketing. You're not just going to
It
toss up a
happens
landing
often
page.
enough. It happens
Yeah,
often
and
enough.
I think we're like still we're still in the process of like learning where the ownership always lies. But I think that will just come from, you know, testing and experience.
I mean, how many people are now working in marketing at Venngage?
About 13 to 15 full time, and then we have a few like remote contractors here and there.
Hmm. And how have you structured the team? I mean, do you have is it by channel, or how have you thought about that?
Yeah, so we not really. It's by everyone's kind of focused on the same goal. We have a content team where most of their focus is kind of on like is on the acquisition. So I think it's more of an acquisition team,
Hmm.
and then a growth team, which is maybe mid bottom of the funnel. Um, so the acquisition team is looking at acquisition of like one very specific type of user, right? Like that's the goal. And for the most part, it's been through content and SEO. That's
Mm-hmm.
what we do. We also have, and then we have an international team to localize into other languages, because like a huge portion of our audience now is coming from Latin America and some parts of Europe. So that team focuses on pretty much taking what works from the US portion of the team and like kind of like transitioning it and figuring out how to localize it. Can we kind of hit the same metrics? And one of the main things that's come from local or expansion in LATAM is pricing models, right? Like the price, the conversion metrics are just not the same because of the cost of living and things like that. Whereas in certain parts of Europe, it's a lot better because of what the cost factor is. So a lot of what we're trying to play around with now is like, how do we maintain acquisition or like get it to a good enough level without compromising for churn, right? So even if it means like there are certain people that may have to pay a lot less, and at the end of the day, does it still benefit the business to let that happen? And now we're going into like more team expansion, right? And more team workflows. Like we just released an actual real-time collaboration function where people can just make presentations, infographics, mind maps, everything together. I think we can support up to 1,000 people on like one design. And so that's been like a heavily requested thing where now we're like moving into kind of this team expansion of how do we, obviously you're not going to use collaboration alone, like you need a team. So so that's like that's kind of moving up market strategy. So there's like two pieces of it where there's like a lot to work with. And
so Venngage, how I got in touch with it a couple of years ago was as an infographic tool. Now you ventured into other kind of graphical elements as well, because I also saw like ebooks,
yeah, so
templates.
I would say we're more now in the realm of visual communication as a platform. And a lot of the people that will use Venngage and that actually find value are the ones that have, you know, some type of complex kind of convoluted information that they need to make interesting. So to put it into better terms, if it's really boring, like putting into some type of like visual platform will kind of make it pop a little bit more. So most of the people that use us frequently are like teams that are using us for internal communication, especially now with everyone being remote. Like you have like a virtual team meeting, no one's going to pay attention to the slides if it's just like a bunch of text, right? I know, like I'll zone out for that. And so there's like a lot more use cases like that with, you know, newsletters, internal communications, ebooks, lead generation documents, a lot of things like that where are becoming more and more common.
That's interesting though. So that a lot of new use cases also mean like it's probably harder to position yourself. Like where do you position yourself today in the minds of your customers? Like what?
Yeah, well, so that's what I mean. Like if our main job to be done, for instance, would be help me communicate complex information, right? And basically make it more engaging and more inspiring to get the message across. And I think the best example is I remember speaking at an event a few years ago, and I had made this presentation deck like using Venngage, and somebody came up to me at the end of the talk and said, usually I'm in a presentation and, you know, like I'll pull like one main thing out of that talk. And she's like, after your talk, she's like, I feel like I remember every single thing you talked about just because of how the visuals are outlaid. And I was just like, that's a perfect example of just like education and communication, right? People, there's so much distraction online right now. Like it's really hard to capture somebody's attention and keep it. So that was like a really great example of what we're trying to do, right? It's like, how do you maintain attention? And I guess going back to my theater degree of like learning about audience engagement, this is kind of where the connection really fits together.
So it's in a way like a support tool for telling stories, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it helps you so you don't have to like log into Figma and like trying to
visual
put something together.
storytelling, and it's easy so that you can just drag and drop visual storytelling.
Yeah. So and one thing that I am seeing a lot, I mean, at least in Europe, maybe you can talk about Canada as well, is actually finding the right talent um, um, is often quite challenging, because what I am seeing anyways is like there is a oversupply of like traditional marketers that you know, come from like the old guard, and there's kind of an over demand of marketing leaders with experience, and that's also what we're trying to do with this podcast, to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, and try to marketing leaders like you, who have, you know, started from like basically knowing nothing and just like trying to figure it out. So how, if you know, if I'm your employee and I come to you and I say like, hey, I really want to get um, I really want to become a marketing leader, like how, where do I start? Like, do you have any kind of education resources that you recommend often, or do you always recommend to do it like you did it? Because I mean, you just basically went out and tried shit
Yeah.
out.
And yeah, so that's what I did. But I guess the main thing that helped me was, like I said, talking to other people who I
Hmm.
thought were doing a good job. So it still wasn't like looking for traditional marketers. I had a very specific objective, right? At one point, it was like, how do I create better content? So looking at, you know, who's writing great content. If one of those objectives was, I want to be a writer on, I don't know, Entrepreneur Forbes, who's writing on Entrepreneur Forbes? How did they
Yeah.
get there? So it depends on the specific instances. And I think ultimately, like a good marketer will just like collect the data from the right people. So like I'm not going to go and talk to Forbes writer and ask them, how do I optimize email funnel A, right? That they're like, I
Right.
don't know, I write about management. And so I'm going to have to go and find somebody who's good at that one piece. And that was what I did. And what we call it is, we refer to it as growth interviews in at Venngage, where once a month, you know, everyone has to go like interview somebody who's doing what they
Oh.
want to do very, very well, and basically do a 5-minute presentation on like the main things that they learned and what they're going to do as the next step. And that's just something that's helped me, is just like, I think I learned more from networking and just like learning from other people. Um, and and that's just what I've continued to do, is just like ask people for an opinion. And most people will tell you, won't blog about the real stuff, right? They're gonna write about it, or they're gonna tell you in person, um and give you like the specific examples as it pertains to your business.
Ah, that's actually, I mean, you mentioned it in the beginning, that's true. I think talking to people who have solved the problems that you are trying to solve is a very smart way of actually getting smarter yourself. Because honestly, like at least of the countries that I've lived in, there is not really you know, an advanced school of marketing, you know, where you can
Yeah,
go in. I mean, there's Reforge that I know of that has a good
Reforge is
curriculum.
good.
Reforge is good. I think, I mean, other than that, there's some courses on CXL for like certain specific courses maybe that are a bit more
Yeah,
advanced. Um, but other than that, I
but
mean, it's quite hard.
even so, it's just like, you can take as many courses as you want, but if you don't ultimately like have that critical thinking ability, and you don't
Yeah.
you're not good at hitting a goal, right? So for me, I'm looking for people, I think, one of the main things is I look for people who have a track record of doing something
Yeah.
well, who have a history of good ideas, and a history of executing on those good ideas. And it doesn't matter what it is, right? You could be have your own little side project, and if you talk me through how you made that one little weird thing work, fine. If you like, if it worked and it was a good idea, and you can keep proving that there's all these other things that you did, that's enough. Like, you don't need to go to a marketing school. You might know all the skills and you might have all the like academia behind it,
Right.
but every company is so different and every process is going to be different. There's no way that you can apply the same thing to every single business that you go to, right? What works for like a healthcare industry that's super technical may not work for another business that's like Venngage, where we're like in this design space, like they're totally different industries. You're still going to have to learn something new when you go to the company. And the only thing that really is consistent are those soft skills, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned, can we mention those again? So what you look for in like your perfect candidate, if you want, across at least the ones where you can say like are mostly soft skills across the board. Like, so you mentioned curiosity, you
Yeah,
mentioned kind of a
so
doer mindset.
yeah, curiosity, I guess, like a little bit of risk taking, like you're not afraid to just like test something.
Hmm.
Um, Good ideas, like you need to have good ideas, and like how do you measure that? For me, it's again like that track record of doing things right,
Hmm.
and making it work. Like I'm more interested in seeing somebody execute on an idea that they had because they thought it would, even if it was a prank, right? Like I don't care. I'm like, did you do it though? Like, because if you ideas are a dime a dozen, I don't want somebody who's just going to spit out ideas and never do anything with them, right? I want somebody who has an idea and figured out how to do it and why it's a cool thing to continue doing. Um, and yeah, so just like like a consistent proof of practice, right? I want to see that you did something. I don't care what the paper says, because in my experience there's a lot of people who have like great resumes, and they're like, they seem so good on paper, and then when it actually comes to doing it, just like can't hit the mark. And then I have people who have terrible grades, but they did a lot of stuff and like
Hmm.
they're able to figure it out, right? Because they've actually got experience in a different sense.
So it's also some determination and actually following through with stuff and not just, as you said, like ideas are not worth that much by
Yeah,
themselves.
I feel like good marketers like to play, right? They like to like
Yeah.
go into the sandbox and get their hands dirty. And like there's some good marketers that are highly academic, but those are the ones they're good at doing the homework, but when it comes to like actually standing in front of the class and doing what you just said in your essays, it cannot execute. um,
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned and also like just by researching a little bit for this podcast, I came across a few of your crazy ideas. If you want, what was that, like some kind of underground restaurant or something? I think
oh yeah,
I
no, I
heard
have a lot of
somewhere.
crazy things I do on a whim, and often the goal is something entirely different and unrelated.
Do you
Yeah.
if you follow, like if you have an idea, um, what happens then? I mean, are you just like, fuck this, let's do it. Let's just try it. I mean, how are you evaluating a good idea? You
Oh
know?
yeah, no, my ideas are on a whim, and then I get really excited about something for a very short period of time and get very impulsive, and I'll do it just to
Hmm.
prove that it works. And then as soon as I can see, okay, there's like all this stuff that's working, I'm like, I can come back to it if I need to, and then
Yeah.
I'll like let it go. Like my partner and I started selling margaritas during COVID because we were like, let's sell margarita kits. And I think I just looked at the SEO trends, and I'm like, holy, like SEO, like the trends for margarita in Toronto were like skyrocketing or something. So I'm like, maybe I could just like hyper target people like within a 3 mile radius of my house with free delivery margarita kits, and we were making them, and we ended up doing like, I think in the first couple of weeks, like $1,000 in sales with like a 60% profit margin. I'm like, okay, we
Uh-huh.
can do it. And then I just stopped because I didn't care
Yeah.
anymore.
So
And
it's the
so I was,
sake of it.
yeah. And
You
I
kind
think
of
it
do it.
still comes back to like, I'm able to prove and validate the idea, but
Yeah.
if I needed to do it and I needed to scale it, I could, but right now I don't want to.
Hmm.
So I like to be able to prove that something is validated, I think. So I like the experimentation.
I mean, you also had like a quite, I guess that's relative, but like you were quite public with articles and speeches and so forth in like 2017 or like 16, 17. And I guess it feels somewhat of a like personal branding that you've been doing as well, maybe also building links, as you mentioned before. Is that something that you are interested in as like marketing yourself in order to get more opportunities, or was that just out of necessity at the time?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, I think in order for you, if you have a good personal brand, you know, that's what will follow you and what other companies might be more interested
Hmm.
in later on, right? They're not, if I'm just on the sidelines and invisible and maybe this company is growing, but I'm not never talking about it and never anywhere, will anyone ever want to work with me? Probably not. Like you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit to show that you actually have some experience and something to say about what you're doing. But I think it goes hand in hand. Like you kind of need, and it's pretty common now, right? Like so many good companies and big companies that we know of, there's always somebody at that company that you kind of
Mm,
associate with. And people like putting a face to a business, right? You want to feel like you maybe know the
absolutely.
business on a humane level rather than just as a brand or a company.
And maybe to slowly come to an end as well. Do you have certain channels that you are specifically excited about at the moment, where you see trends pointing in the right direction, for your business?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, a lot of our focus was top of funnel, but now we're focusing a little bit more on like mid bottom of the funnel, like conversions, that kind of thing. And I think I'm getting more excited about like product interventions and how to influence that rather than just like the content side, which is where I'm playing around with more now. So not just email, but like how do we kind of integrate everything together? What can we do in the product at the right time for the right people to like
Mm.
nurture them into the direction that we think makes the most sense? So a lot more education, still content, but now just later on, not
Yeah.
top of funnel content.
Do you have product marketers at all that are employed at the moment that are focusing solely on like the story, the positioning, and kind of product content specifically?
No, our product managers and marketing team work quite closely together in
Mm.
that sense. Like I said, all of the projects and pitches that we do come from kind of a cumulative company. So it's almost like the entire Venngage is a growth team.
Mhm.
Realistically, the way that we operate, we the whole company has the same goal. We're all working towards the same. If like if marketing's goal is acquire, you know, user X for this job to be done. Product has the exact same goal. It's just
Yeah.
activate that user and then convert that user and nurture them and retain that user. So it's the same thing. And so it aligns the company on the right metrics, right? So if marketing pitches an idea and it still aligns with that goal, of course they're going to be more willing to execute on it because it matches up with what they need to do too, and vice versa.
Mhm. If you would be, um, kind of dropped in a completely new environment today. Let's say we are still in the SaaS space. It would be a completely, um, let's say we go into B2B. What would you focus on, specifically, in the beginning?
For shifting into like more of a B2B focus, for instance.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'd probably repeat the same process and go back to learning like what B2B companies are doing well. What have they done? Like, what are the little steps that I can take? Who can I talk to? And start to experiment right there.
It's like, as the last thing, I kind of want to find out, as I mean, if you say, you are reaching out to people that do well what you want to learn, or where you try to figure out what other companies do, like what is your process, like what do you look for? Because oftentimes you also don't have the data really, like yeah, what do you look for if you try to find the companies or the people that have succeeded?
I mean, you can like I'll use tools like something like similar web or Ahrefs to see like where's their traffic coming from, like how much
Hmm.
are they spending. Chances are if you're driving enough traffic from various sources and you're spending a lot of money, probably are spending it for a reason, right? Like because it's working. So those are the things. I'm not going to look at a company that has like barely any traffic and says that they're doing well on their landing page, that's not going to tell me anything. And for the most part, like obviously I want to look at SaaS, right? Like I don't want to look into an industry that's entirely different.
Right.
I want to look at other software companies that have managed to be successful moving up market and what's worked for them. What has their content strategy shifted from? And ideally, if they went from the same process, right? Did they start B2C and then move up market? Did they start as a freemium model product and now they only have a paid product? Like, how did that work? And yeah, those are probably the things I would start with.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Do you have some specific resources or books that you have on your shelves that you gift to your team or recommend to your team that they should read, or also could also be to peers, other marketing leaders?
Yeah, one of mine, like I guess my aha moment in management books was Andy Grove's book, High Output Management. I recommend that to a lot of people. I really like Creativity Inc. too, Ed Catmull from Pixar. That was really good storytelling, but also very good lessons on management. Currently, I'm reading Thinking Fast and Slow. Other things.
Cool.
Those are probably like the main recommendations right now.
Those are some great books. All right. Well, Nadia, thank you very, very much. The audience got to hear some great insights from a marketer who has executed and who has put her ideas into fruition or brought them to fruition. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.